Welcome to another episode of The Golden Hour. I'm Sharif Yunus here with Dr. Kevin Majeres. Kevin, welcome.
Hey, Sharif, good to be here.
Thanks for coming on. And we're here to talk about a topic that, well, frankly, we've been putting it off for quite some time now, but I think the time is finally right to start discussing it. And the topic is procrastination. Kevin, what are your thoughts on procrastination?
I think that it's a way of thinking of an obstacle in work that I typically haven't engaged. Because I think that I tend to approach things more from the inner experience, and I always saw procrastination simply as reluctance. And so, in fact, the golden hour that on OptimalWork that helps people overcome procrastination is called reluctance for that reason. But I think there are interesting topics in the topic of procrastination that deserve special interest, and I don't think it's that hard a thing to learn to overcome. And so I thought, well, this could be great for us to be discussing for our listeners.
Great. So maybe just to start by asking, what is there like a technical definition of procrastination? I think we can all have the experience of feeling like, okay, I'm procrastinating on this project, or have memories of having procrastinated. But what really is procrastination? Are there kind of related topics that we need to distinguish it from?
Yeah, I think that procrastination involves two difficulties. So it's not the most simple problem, but it's helpful then. So what is procrastination? Simply, it's delaying a task that you know you should start. And in fact, you know that delaying will be harmful to you in some way. And so why does it happen, right? That people have good intentions, but there's a gap between their intention and their action. So, and procrastination is an interesting way of then thinking about that gap between intention and action, and what is it really that comes between them. So, in one sense, there are the two big problems in procrastination. The first is self-deception. Right, so that you keep telling yourself, well, I'll do this tomorrow. That's literally what it means. It means for tomorrowing in Latin. So
that's what procrastination literally means?
Yeah, that's what it literally means, for, and then tomorrow. So you're putting things off for tomorrow. And that is a way that is easy for us to deceive ourselves. And there are different reasons, I think, that we could discuss later of why people deceive themselves in this way. But the key is, the beginning of procrastination is self-deception. Another element, though, of procrastination is an illusion. Okay, so we can talk about those. Those are two different issues, you could say. So one is the rationalizations that go into saying, "Yeah, I'll do this tomorrow. I'll do this at some later time. Or it'll be better tomorrow. It'll be easier tomorrow." Whatever it might be, people will rationalize, so that they don't feel guilt about putting something off, even though they know it's better to do it now. Another issue is overcoming this illusion that the task is going to be very hard to do. And you see all the effort the task entails. But it's as if you're seeing all that effort as if it's there at the first step. And that blocks you. It's like somehow there's a really high effort you'll need as the cost of entry. So you could call it the cost of entry illusion. And so it's you have this sense that, before, oh man, I have to write this, this 20-page paper. Oh, it's so much effort. There's so much to do. As if it's like the entire effort is all bunched up right that very first step of beginning it.
In some ways, these seem to be related. I mean, it seems like the kind of essence of procrastination would be kind of this, or the cause, maybe we could say, of procrastination is the second one, where there's a high cost of entry into the task, and so that leads to you actually procrastinating, and then you deceive yourself to think that to rationalize that you did the right thing. Is that kind of the right order?
I think that is the right order. So you're kind of like the victim of your own illusion. So because of this illusion of the cost of entry being so high, you then delude yourself to not actually start it right now.
Right. So actually, what could you apply this analysis to the moment of jumping out of bed or snoozing. So it seems like one procrastinates the day. I suppose you don't literally put it off till tomorrow, but you procrastinate it for 7 minutes or
it does
10
remind
minutes or
me of
however long you snooze.
it reminds me of the lady who had said that she had a little card that she wrote saying, "Tomorrow I will jump out of bed when my alarm goes off." And she put it next to her nightstand, and she would read it when she would go to bed and be all ready to jump out of bed in the morning. But then in the morning, she would wake up and she would look over and read the card, and it says, "Tomorrow I will jump out of bed in the morning," and then she would snooze. So there is a sense that the same kind of avoidance is going on. And even though you know it's the best thing, is to actually do the first step, which is jumping out of bed, it just seems like you have the whole day ahead of you then. So I think this is a species, you could say, of the illusion of simultaneity. Whenever people feel overwhelmed, this tends to be at work, that they're just so overwhelmed by what they have to do, but it's because they're seeing all their tasks as if they're supposed to happen right now at once. And if they would see, in fact, how much there is like space in between, then they would see, okay, actually I have time to do everything I need to do. And these things, you have one big thing in 3 days, another big thing in 7 days, but there's time in between. But this is just like that. But it's as if seeing then, like, when you're putting off starting the day, it's because the whole day seems like the effort's bunched up at that starting point. See, before you really enter the steps of a task, you have this tendency to make some kind of sum in your mind of all the effort every step will entail, and that seems huge. So, but the issue is that if you actually just get started on the first step, that first step doesn't really take much effort at all, typically, or if it does, make it smaller. And then the next step, and so at no point is the effort actually huge. Each thing is just a series of small steps, none of which take great effort. So if you're laying in bed thinking, oh man, I'm going to get out of bed and then I'm going to go exercise, then I'm going to go, have breakfast, then I'm going to go start my work day and then have this meeting and that, well then it's just the whole day weighs on you. But once you just get started on the first step, which is jumping out of bed, now you have a more realistic assessment of the whole. Now, there will still be smaller things that you're going to tend to procrastinate in the day, where you will be wanting to deceive yourself to push it off because it seems like it's so hard to get started on it. Okay, but as soon as you get started on it, once you're on the first step of a task, that illusion goes away totally. And that's just something people have to get used to experiencing. This thing seems like a huge project, and you keep putting it off, but you just get started on the first step, and now you have a realistic sense. Okay, this is how it's going to unfold step by step. So the key for procrastinators is just getting started, right? But that means overcoming their self-deception. So when you're actually getting over procrastination, the first thing I think is being able to really identify when you're doing it so that you can see, okay, you have to I think it's sincerity to be, okay, am I really aiming to get this thing done well? And then coming up with the steps I need to do it well. So even that, just thinking, what are don't think I have to pay my taxes and you keep putting it off. You start to think, okay, I really do want to commit to paying them. So what are the actual steps I need? And then if you were to, lay out the steps, okay, and you can then get started much more easily. So you have to think about what you're going to do and then don't make it vague. Overcome the vagueness. Resolve, get the definition clearer of the end and the means. So that's what am I going to do? And then really be clear about the steps you're going to take. So even if you're thinking, well, no, I'm going to do this tomorrow, it'd be better for you to think, okay, when would I start it and what's the step I would begin with? Mm-hmm. But then you could do that today.
In your view, what is kind of the standard approach that people take to procrastination? How do people tend to overcome it? Would it be, last week we talked about the idea of discipline. Mm-hmm. So it seems I just got to kind of buckle down and just start. I just got to do it.
Yeah.
Would that be what you see as how people normally respond to procrastination? They almost see it as a kind of lack of discipline. Mm-hmm. And what we're saying here is start with order.
Yeah. Sincerity.
Start with break it down.
Yeah.
Break it down into the smallest first step. So you're using your intelligence to lower the cost of entry into the task.
Yep. And you're just making the steps definite. So there's this thing about just defining the first step and when and where you're going to do it. But and then you can see that the effort that step takes isn't going to be that big. So the cost of entry has normalized. So I think that one thing as order to be arranging the steps in your mind, at least the first step. And if it seems too big, break it down further until you get to another first step. That's actually what our reluctance golden hour does for people. It has
Right.
the steps of whatever they're working on, they lay it out, and then that first step gets broken down again to even smaller steps. And that's just to help people overcome this illusion so that they can say, okay, that first step isn't that hard to do. And then once you get started, the whole illusion is gone, and then you can actually get enthused about the task.
Right. So you mentioned this idea of sincerity and also order. So I take order to be, basically setting out the steps of what you're trying to do and how that's going to help you accomplish your goals. Where sincerity is about this kind of honesty with yourself about what your motivation is, what your motives are. So how do those kind of tie together in the context of procrastination?
Yeah, so I see sincerity as simply order lived in the whole of life, being super clear about the end that you're pursuing. So, like, most deeply, what do I want here? What am I really meaning to do? So, to be clear about the end, and then am I really setting the means to do it? Am I flexible with the means to do it? So I don't get attached to any one means, like an outcome, and that becomes an end in itself. But you're willing to let go of that, whatever the outcome is, and really recommit to whatever the end is, which ideally is other people. So things that transcend you. So like the actual service of others or your actual growth in ideals that then makes you more able to serve and love. So I see like they're actually just about the same thing, but order is when it gets down to this task. What's the end I'm pursuing, and then what are the means? We could say, what's the goal and what are the steps? So you're going to set the goal of how you want this done, like including what would be the best way of doing this task? What does it being really well done look like? That's the first thing of order. And then making sure you have the steps to get there. So it's always about ends and means and clarifying that. So I see that really, and that's super important for procrastination, that are you really focused and sincere with yourself about what you want? And does this really fit into your overall priorities in life? If so, you can't leave it vague. You have to like increase how definite it is and make it more and more concrete. And in a way, that's how sincerity becomes order, is just by making the overall vague goal, you could say, more and more definite, like having greater definition. So now you're specifying it and specifying the steps you're going to take down to the very first simple step. And once you get there, it's easy to apply yourself intensely to that first step. And I think people often have this idea that they approach procrastination as if, they just need to get enough willpower to burst into the task. Like to break through that illusion, the cost of entry illusion. And then they use adrenaline, which you get from procrastinating. Like the deadline's approaching and it's getting closer and closer and closer, and I still haven't started. And then their adrenaline is building. They think they're going to use that to smash through and now do the task. But now, in some ways, that does work, but it's totally useless suffering. Because for one thing, if they had just done the first step in the task, procrastination would have been over. And now they would actually be in it, and it's going to be easy to see the next step and the next step and the next step. And then they can get enthused about it. So say you have a big paper due on Friday, and you're like, well, it's Monday, I could start. I can do it tomorrow. Well, there's that vagueness. I vaguely want to get the paper done, but I'm not being specific about the means. When am I going to start it? And then they don't get to the first step. So in their mind, it's just this weighing on them. Like the whole paper is just weighing on them. And they feel guilty about it and they rationalize it. Then the next day comes. They keep putting it off, and then the next day, and then the next day, until finally, like, oh, I should have started earlier. And that's this inevitable flip that occurs. And then they get a wave of adrenaline, and they think then that they can break through and actually start the task. All of that is useless suffering. And so it's like creating a roller coaster for yourself. And if they had just laid out the task, on OptimalWork, have a project for that kind of task, apply the project here, get started on it step by step, then you get a kind of traction in it and momentum. And then it's actually enjoyable to do. So not all delaying is procrastinating. Sometimes it's a good thing to delay because you have other important things to do. But delaying when you know that everything is vague and you're just not even letting yourself think about the first step, that's the real danger.
Yeah. So, and then one thing I would add to that too is that when you procrastinate, it tends to be, I think people recognize it as like you're wasting time. You're procrastinating by doing something that's not very important, watching TV or checking your phone or whatever it is.
Because in order to procrastinate, you have to keep it vague. You have to keep everything vague.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were to let yourself start resolving it into details and plans, then you would see that, okay, yeah, this actually would be the best time for me to start. So people don't let themselves investigate it. They don't let themselves think about it. And that just means they're going to distract themselves continually. So when you're procrastinating, your risk of wasting time is enormous.
Right.
Because you'll pull at any distraction to keep you from thinking about the thing you're not doing.
Right. So another thing that you mentioned at the very beginning is that procrastination is about a disconnect between intention and action. And then in OptimalWork's approach, we have intention, attention, action. It's like kind of always the formula, the kind of 3 steps. That reframing is intention, mindfulness is attention, challenge is action.
Exactly.
So is there a way in which attention here, in this case mindfulness, is bridging the gap between intention and action?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly right. So that it's applying yourself, like when you think of what order does, order is how you lay out the steps of the task getting to the end, and you make them specific. And then intensity is fully applying your attention to the first step. And then constancy is what sees you through, re-steering if needed to get to the right end. Okay, well, the missing piece there for procrastinators is precisely intensity. They just don't apply their attention to the first step. The moment they would do that, the illusion of the cost of entry would vanish, and they would be able to do it. So that's exactly right. And I think that, one thing is being clear about what you're intending, which includes how you're going to do it. And then the other is actually getting started by applying your task attention to the first step. So I think that even if a task were very difficult and you're not sure how to do it, you're going to have a much better idea once you get started and you work as far as you can until there's some kind of impasse. Then you can pause and come back to it later. That's a different kind of strategy, but it's like, how do you, sometimes there's a benefit to getting yourself setting up tasks by doing the first steps and get into them partway, and then you have a better sense of what actually has to be negotiated. This is if you truly don't know. So that there's a strategy there but it's always having a bias to get started. Getting started, because people, I think, when the cost of entry illusion is very high, they don't think about starting tasks then. They think about getting them done. Like just getting the whole task over with and all the effort that entails. But that's not helpful. That's the illusion. Instead, you just get started, and then you have this realism about the task as a whole. And procrastination, I don't think, is a risk then. There's another kind of related thing that Thomas Pitchell, who's like the psychologist who has studied procrastination the most, and that's a funny Pychyl. But he talks. He has a great book on the psychology of procrastination. The title doesn't come to me right now, but it's a good book on procrastination. And he there talks about the planning fallacy, that sometimes procrastinators, what they fall into is an excessively kind of rosy estimate of how long something will take. And so they think, oh yeah, that's only going to take me a couple hours to do. But again, they leave it vague. They don't think about it. And so they never get something specific. The real way to get specific about how long a task will take is not to ask the question, how quickly can I do this? It's how long does this task usually take me? And just getting yourself to use that question is crucial. You think of similar tasks and just like queuing them up in your memory and then saying, how long does this kind of thing usually take me? You can actually come up with a very realistic assessment. But if you're asking, how quickly can I get this done? You're going to be optimistic in an unrealistic way.
Which is kind of ironic because you're putting it off, but you somehow think it's easier than it's actually going to be. But if you're super optimistic in your assessment, you would think that would mean that you would be more willing to engage it.
Yeah, but there's this sense in which when you feel like you have committed to doing something good in the future, you kind of feel good about that about yourself without actually having done anything. So there is like this sense like, oh yeah, I'm going to do that then. And it feels good as if you put order into it, but you really haven't. So that's, again, part of the self-deception. Another deeper thing in the self-deception there's another researcher, Joseph Ferrari, who talks about chronic procrastinators and what are the kind of traits they have. And he's done studies that showed that chronic procrastinators do not want feedback on their performance. They tend to always avoid feedback on their performance in different research settings. Now, that's an interesting fact. And this gets to maybe, like you could say, a little more complex or deeper cause of procrastination. Not always active, but it could be, which is this idea of self-handicapping. That it's like, if I only give myself one night to write the paper is no longer an assessment of my abilities. And so if I get a bad grade on the paper, well, I did it in a night. But if you get a good grade, it's like, wow, I did that. It's like heroic. I did it. I got an A, even though I only worked on it one night. That's the idea of self-handicapping, so that people are afraid of their performance being assessed, their true ability being assessed. And this is part of what we call the fixed mindset, that they're always afraid of putting in effort because effort measures their abilities. With a growth mindset, effort is precisely how you improve and increase your abilities. And so that's a crucial thing. If you can get someone to have more of a growth mindset and look forward to stretching themselves so their abilities grow, then maybe they can get over that self-handicapping.
Right. And I was thinking about that in relation to the approach of seeking mastery in the task, where if you're seeking mastery in the task, you're going to tend to break it down, work on your process and try to do it better than you've done it before. And so that is naturally going to help you overcome procrastination. If you're thinking, how can I do this well? You're breaking the task down, especially the first steps. And you're really focusing on putting all of your attention into doing those as well as possible. In contrast, if you have the getting things done mentality, then you're more focused on the whole, and then it becomes a more daunting thing. Oh, I have to write this big paper. I have to get this big paper done, and it becomes bigger, whereas the mastery approach leads to things becoming smaller and easier to enter.
That's exactly right.
Very, very cool. This is great stuff, and unfortunately, we are out of time for today. Kevin, thanks so much for joining us.
Sharif, great to be here. And just one last thing to say, I think that it's natural that people will feel an urge to put something off. And I think that the key is, what's the best use you can put that urge to? And hopefully what we're showing people is, why not have a plan for how you deal with that urge? And try to come up with the steps of the task you're putting off, make the first one as small as possible, and then set a time for committing to starting it, maybe right now. But I think that's actually how you reframe the urge, into an opportunity to overcome procrastination.
Wow. That's a great final connection.
All right.
Thanks so much, Kevin.
Thanks for having me here.
All right. See you. Talk to you next week.